breaking news. Trump says it's time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Well, it's always been the glorious capital of the Jewish people. The kings, Saul, David, Solomon, and then Solomon's descendants were all ruling from Jerusalem. It was not the capital of anyone else, and it's not mentioned in anyone else's religious holy book. Not even in the Quran. It's only in the Bible. And so it's amazing that something that's so obvious, something that we would grant ourselves this right, and yet much of the world is denying the same right to the Jewish people. That makes no sense. That has to be motivated by some spiritual motivation. You know, and when you grant yourself rights that you deny others, you're called an oppressor. Every nation in this world would not tolerate another nation voting on or swaying where their capital should be. And yet the whole world is nearly unanimous that Israel should not have its own capital where it historically has been. That is so evil. That is so evil. And so many people are like that. They give themselves rights that they won't accord or afford to others. Do you understand? You understand? If you're in the desert and you give yourself a drink, but you won't give anyone else a drink, and you have plenty of water supply, you're evil. That is an oppressive way to be. So in the end time, this oppression will end. The oppression against the Jewish people. The oppression against the people of God. And who are the oppressors? The ones that give themselves rights and privileges and enjoy those things that they would deny others. It's by definition oppression. You live free in a house, but you enslave other people. You're an oppressor. That's Pharaoh. Right? God is coming back to fix that. That is end time. That's good news. That's wonderful. Because all these centuries, oppressors seem to get away with their oppression. But we see it in front of our eyes. I wonder how you and your friends think about this. Jerusalem is now officially recognized as the capital. And did you know it happened exactly 3 months after the Revelation 12 sign? And the Revelation 12 sign says that a woman gives birth. And in the sky, there was a constellation Virgo giving birth to the king planet on that day. And do you know that after Moses' parents gave birth to him, it was exactly 3 months when she finally said, I have to let him go. And then he was set down the river Nile and found by the daughter of Pharaoh. And that's how he was raised. He became the prince of Egypt. He was raised in royalty. God needed him to be raised in a better household with the top education because he had a very high calling for him. He had a good future. He had to learn all the qualities of leadership, and he wasn't going to learn that living in the house of a slave. You understand that? That God has a destiny for our children. And you need to give them the very best opportunities. You don't know what God is going to do to use them. But what's interesting is there was a 3-month wait. And these things are cycles. Everything that's in the Bible is a cycle because it will be repeated in some other way. And 3 months after, the UN got together, and the UN is, I'm about to tell you what the UN did, but this is Donald Trump recognized it. On the 6th of December, I have determined that it is time to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. There's Mike Pence there, born-again Christian vice president, standing behind him. And America will now finally move its embassy to Jerusalem. Now you hear all this big news that how bad it is and how unprecedented for Donald Trump to unilaterally make this action. Actually, no, he's just following U.S. law. Do you know that it's U.S. law since 1995? It's called the Jerusalem Embassy Act. What's the law? The law says America recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It says that every sovereign state has the right to choose its own capital. And it says that $25 million have already been granted to build an embassy for the United States in Jerusalem. So what have all the other presidents done? They've either given false campaign promises that they'll actually do this, perform this law, in which case they're liars, or they're just, pro Middle East, I guess, pro-Arab, and then they didn't move the embassy. But finally, Trump has kept his word. This makes Benjamin Netanyahu very happy. Every Christian and every Jew can now celebrate that God keeps his word. You think about that. The whole world is against this. And all God needed was, he says, one Cyrus can say, build the temple. I don't need everybody to agree, God says. Do you know that in your life? The whole world can seem to be against you. Those that have power can seem to be against you. And God raises one person up in your life and everything changes. That's why you need to depend on God. No matter how much you reason, you won't figure it out on your own. You need to trust God. You should say an amen just now. Amen. Oh, does she look very happy, Frederica? She's the EU foreign policy chief. Every time I see her, she doesn't look very happy. The European globalists are extremely displeased that they cannot control Donald Trump and that they cannot control Israel. And this is what they've done since the Roman times. Same people, same nations, doing the same things. Rome always treated Israel as a fringe outpost that it can just toy with. That's what the Roman Empire did, and killed and persecuted many Jews. How are they different now when they are so anti-Semitic that they say Israel cannot have a capital? So this is what they did. They play their UN game. I used to belong to Model United Nations. And as soon as I got involved with that, I really recognized they were there just to play games. Resolution after resolution. If the United Nations had any power to perform its act, its mandate to bring peace, then it should have brought peace to Israel 70 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and it has utterly failed. When I lived in New York and our family was involved in real estate and travel for different things, one of our relatives, I think, had some project in Cambodia, was it? And she saw the projects there that United Nations money would go in. This is decades ago, by the way. United Nations money would go in to fund all of this personnel. They are always overstaffed. A glut. Any business would have to shave off, excess. But the UN is an operation of excess. And so they have all these UN trucks. Everybody's got a UN truck. And you know where they're parked at night? They're parked at the brothels of Cambodia. And this is what the local people and the people who know what's going on see. They abuse and misuse our money, which could be used in our own nation. And they haven't brought peace. Where were they for Rwanda? Where were they? Where were they for Israel? Yeah? So pouring all this money into a failed organization and then having them, you just watch. Look at what they're doing now. The United Nations General Assembly met for the 10th emergency special session. What is the emergency? Behold, the emergency. They call on their emergency power according to Resolution 377, Section A-1. It's called the Uniting for Peace Resolution. Guess where I've heard that before in the Bible? The resolution states, in cases where the Security Council, these are the permanent members who have veto power, and America has veto power, so America just vetoed their anti-Semitic, anti-Israel resolution. So they say we have to meet in emergency. If because of a lack of unanimity against or among its 5 permanent members, if the Security Council then fails to act as required to maintain international peace and security, remember those words, the General Assembly shall consider the matter immediately and may issue any recommendations it deems necessary in order to restore international peace and security. If not in session at the time, the General Assembly may meet using the mechanism of the emergency special session. So on the 22nd of December, remember the number 22? I said it keeps coming up, the number of the Jews. Things related to the Jews in end times, 22. Revelation has 22 chapters. The Jews have 22 letters in their alphabet. Jacob suffered for 22 years. Time of Jacob's trouble was 22, not 7, like American preachers assume. Okay, so the UN get together, and what do? Anything righteous, anything good? No, more talk, more resolutions that mean nothing. They vote to condemn the U.S. Jerusalem decision. And Trump says, okay, go ahead and vote. We'll be taking names. Because America funds the UN. So many other nations contribute little, and the little they contribute, they're in arrears. They're late. Yeah? They're derelict in their payment. So here's America funding this thing, and they're voting against an American decision. So Trump says, go ahead and do it. And here's Netanyahu, who was traveling a lot in 2017, counting many people as his new allies, and yet one by one, they vote for the UN resolution to condemn Israel, which means they are voting against Israel. And how do people who mistreat Israel fare? How do they go? The Bible says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. I will be an adversary to your adversary. And so many times, natural disasters happen in conjunction with a resolution, a decision by a state to go against Israel. There is a God, and you may fool yourself and kid yourself there isn't a God. There is a God. He watches over His people. He watches over Christians. And yes, the Jews have not yet believed the Messiah, and yet He is in permanent covenant with Abraham. Because of His covenant with Abraham, He still watches over the Jews. Do you understand that? So more than 100 countries defied Trump and voted for this anti-Jerusalem UN resolution. But nothing new. Nothing new to us. We know what the UN is like. Benjamin Netanyahu called it a house of lies. That would be a euphemism. What are they doing with all the personnel, the resources, the staff, and the money? What are they doing? What are they accomplishing? More resolutions. Here, look at what they've accomplished. From 2012 to 2015, they adopted 97 resolutions criticizing countries. How well do you do in business if you just adopt resolutions criticizing other businesses? Huh? If you're Samsung and you issue 97 resolutions criticizing iPhone, you'd be a fool. You'd be laughed at. But we pay these people to do things that are absolutely absurd. So they issue resolutions criticizing countries, and guess what? 86% were against Israel. The only free, democratic state. Supposedly they go to war to try to promote democracy, right? The Western powers. Well, here is the only true democracy in the entire Middle East. The only place that is fairly safe, egalitarian for women, even homosexuals, and yet they're condemning this state. It makes no sense, because unless you see things from a spiritual point of view, unless you take your glasses off, that you've been fed certain indoctrination, you can never see why would this be. It just makes no sense, right? The world is not for the Bible. The world wants homosexual rights. Well, guess what? In every Muslim country, there are no homosexual rights. They throw homosexuals off minarets. And here's Israel that defends homosexual rights, and yet they're hated, even by the homosexuals. Homosexuals will go into parades against Israel and for Palestine. Can you see that there's a spiritual bond? There's a spiritual bondage, and there's a spiritual blindness over people. You ask them to explain it, they can't even explain it. There's no logic to this. The United Nations Human Rights Council, so they're here to defend human rights. They adopted 135 resolutions criticizing countries, and more than 50% are against Israel. Can you think of any other nation that imprisons political dissenters, murder homosexuals, abuse women and their rights? Can you think of a bunch of other countries? I'm sure you can. And yet the UN is more for those countries than for Israel. If you come to Israel with me and you travel, you feel very safe. It is not like what the news says. It's safe, it's free, and yet the whole world is against them, and their neighbors, other than Jordan and Egypt, want them annihilated. It's amazing how blind we are, the world is. So what nations were they that voted for and against. 128 nations favored this anti-Israel resolution. Only 9 were against, and 35 abstained. They couldn't bear to say yes, and to vote with Trump, and to vote with Netanyahu for Israel, and so they just simply did not vote. They were out for lunch or out shopping or something, didn't quite make the meeting. That's what abstain means, by the way. So we've sent them over, and they're out shopping for who knows what, Gucci or something like that. Not present. I mean, if you pay them this much money, at least you should be present for the meeting, right? So who are the ones that abstain? Because at least these are neutral. At least these are neutral. And I'm joking. Maybe they're in the meeting and they decide not to vote. All right? Thank God Australia took the neutral stance. Australia. So we're at least free from any guilt of being an anti-Semitic nation. Argentina, Canada, Czech Republic, Hungary, Mexico, Rwanda, Uganda. By the way, all of these countries, Christian majority countries. Christian majority countries. My Jewish listeners, your only friends left in the world are Christians. Stop believing what you heard when you were a kid, that Jesus is a name not to be uttered in this house. So many Jewish kids were taught that. And yet Christians love you. And Christians did not kill you in the Holocaust. These were, the National Socialist Party of Germany is called the Nazi people. They are secularist atheists. They're not preaching the gospel, right? They were killing and imprisoning as many Christians who were protecting the Jews during World War II. And I wish the history wasn't so distorted, because Jews have been mistaught about this. But you can see clearly, at least, if you don't know history, at least catch up with the present. Christian nations are the only nations that vote for Israel. The 9 that vote resolutely for Israel and against the UN resolution: Guatemala, Honduras, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Togo. These are all little islands. They're all Christian. All of those nations are Christian. Not a single atheist nation, not a Buddhist nation, not a Hindu, not a Muslim nation. All of those are Christian nations that vote for you, Jewish friends. Would you please open your eyes and realize Jesus is the most famous Jew in the world for a reason. He is for you, and we are for you. So I believe these 128 nations are in danger. I don't know what can happen to 128 nations, because that's a lot of people. And that's why I believe that possibly what's going to come down in 2018 is a worse financial crisis than 2008. So we have to pray against this and bind this, because we're the only power left that's able to come against the powers and the agenda of the financial criminals that try to engineer this. 2008 was engineered. Many movies have been made about that. People knew what was going on. They were abusing the system and the derivatives, and valueless assets were being exchanged and traded as if they had value. They knew this, and they didn't care, because it was we, the little people, that would suffer, and not the big guys who covered themselves. Zacharia chapter 12 verse 2 says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces." Can you see that the United Nations emergency session represent nations that burden themselves? There's no emergency going on. Nothing bad is happening. Israel's not invading anybody. It's their own capital. And one nation is moving their embassy to the proper capital. This is not a rocket being launched. This is not a nuclear program that's violating treaties. But they burden themselves. And God said, they will be cut in pieces who burden themselves with this thing that they should not even interfere with. Though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Well, how would all the people of the earth be gathered together in the year 500 BC? Zechariah was written in 500 BC, when they had not even the means of going to the Americas. when traveling just across Europe would take 3 months just to get to Israel. They packed for 3 months. How would anybody get together? This alone, you read it so glibly because now we're connected by phone and internet and TV and flights. This verse means end times, and it just happened. It was fulfilled. The nations of the world got together how? In New York, under the banner United Nations, in case you don't even know that this is being fulfilled. He says, okay, I'll let you call yourselves the United Nations. The nations united and got together and burdened themselves with Jerusalem. And what will be the result? These nations that came against God's people will be cut down. I know of only one way that all these nations can be cut down, excluding the nations that were not against Israel. It has to be financial trouble. There's no forest fire that would cross all boundaries. There's no hurricane that could cross all boundaries. The only thing that can cross all boundaries is major financial catastrophe. I'm just saying, maybe it is something else. Maybe there's, who knows, a volcano that's so big that it affects everyone, or radiation that would affect multiple nations. I don't know. I'm just saying, from just practical point of view, it seems like a judgment that is financial. Apparently now, today, the only acceptable form of racism is anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism. If you don't know, the word Semite refers to people who descended from Shem, and so that includes the Jews. It includes more than the Jews, but it's become known as being anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. We're so close, everything that the Word of God predicted. Imagine, this stuff is 3,000 years old. The stuff the Bible said about Israel is 3,000 years old. And with all of our technology, we can't even get tomorrow's weather correct. We can't even predict next week correctly. Imagine all these climate change fraud scientists that think they can predict 50 years from now. Hey, get the weather right a week from now, then I'll believe that you know what the weather's going to be 50 years from now. We've been anticipating this. We even made a mug in anticipation of this. This is the 70th anniversary, 70 years of Israel mug with Benjamin Netanyahu and me on it. And it's written in Hebrew writing, 70 years of Israel. We're so expectant. We know something great's going to happen, and it's already begun.